Okay, I'm going to, the best way to do this, I've kept, during the war, during my missions, I kept a diary. After every mission, when we came back, I sat down in a tent and recorded best I could remember what happened. And I think to give you the taste and the feel about how it was, I'm going to pick a few of the missions that I flew on that were particularly demonstrative of the kind of thing we had to deal with. But in a preliminary, I'd be sure to raise your hands if you can't hear me. This is a big room and there are a lot of us here. The acoustics aren't that great. So if I don't speak so that you can hear me, please raise your hand. Anyway, it starts out here, the faded gold leaf stamped on the small red leather cover read, Diary, 1944. I had stored it away long ago together with a pair of silver wings, an air medal, photographs, a small ragged Bible, and miscellaneous other memorabilia of World War II. How did I ever survive? I wonder. As I leafed through the yellow pages, each describing one of the 52 combat missions I flew over Europe as a gunner on a B-17 Flying Fortress. One page, dated April 12, 1944, read, shivering in the damp, freezing darkness of early evening, I stood in line with several hundred other members of the 816th Bomb Squadron, 483rd Bomb Group, 15th Air Corps. Our base is in is on an Italian countryside, and we waited, mess kits ready to go through the outdoor chow line. I had just returned from my first mission and stood in line behind another gunner who was expressing great relief and joy that on this day he had completed his required 50th and final raid and was going home. I have only 49 more to fly. The specter of flying 49 more missions dealing with German fighter attacks and punishing flak didn't exactly enhance my appetite tonight. Our squadron of 25 bombers is parked a short distance from the tents where we are quartered. H hour is as early as 3 a.m. was the time crews were awakened on rain days, depending on the distance to targets in northern Italy, France, Austria, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, and Germany. On Friday, June 16th, H hour was at 3 a.m. Excuse me. At briefing, we learned our target that day was a German military base surrounded by over 100 anti-aircraft guns in Vienna, Austria. The reason we knew they had this kind of armament waiting for us was because we had reconnaissance planes who went out and covered the territory we were going to bomb the next day, and with photo lenses and various ways of estimated, they could tell us before we got there what we were going to face. And at the briefing that morning, as a radio operator and gunner, I had to go and get the codes that I needed for radioing back to the base after we made our hit as to whether or not, and I also had to take photographs of the actual hit to make sure, to have some record of whether we'd effective or not that day. On Friday, excuse me, repeating some of this, on Friday, June 16th, H hour was at 3:30 a.m. At briefing, we learned our target that day was a German military base surrounded by over 100 anti-aircraft guns in Vienna, Austria. Expect very heavy flak, gentlemen. This is a key Nazi arsenal, and they'll throw everything they have at us to protect it. Very heavy flak. didn't come close to what we faced as we had neared Vienna. The sky over the target was almost solid black by bursting shells, and we had to fly straight through it all. The noise was tremendous, our plane recoiling violently from the explosions around us, sending shards of metal slicing through our wings, tail, and fuselage. I had always been comforted before every mission by reciting the 23rd Psalm to myself, quote, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil." This time, on this mission, all sense of calm left me, and I became absolutely terrified as the barrage intensified. I felt trapped, smothered, paralyzed. I simply could not move. And then something happened so wonderful. I can only describe it. I can only try. I'll get through this, okay? Right there in the midst of all that chaos, I felt a sense of serenity and peace steal slowly over me, and I knew that I was in divine hands. No matter what happened, every trace of fear left me, and though we had the worst of the flak ahead of us and several hundred miles of enemy territory to fly over on the way home, it wasn't that I knew for certain that I would survive the mission. It was a certainty that no matter what happened, I would continue to live in spirit, blessed and sheltered in the loving arms of God. That was over 60 years ago. It was the most profound experience of my life. Never before or since have I felt more certain of God's eternal, loving presence wherever I am, in whatever circumstance. As it says in the 91st Psalm, I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust. My fortress. And I always thought it was rather poetic that our airplane was known as the Flying Fortress, and this was my favorite prayer. Sunday, August 26th. This was a day I'll never forget as long as I live. Our destination was supposed to be my 50th and final combat mission, and it was in southern Germany. But cloud cover forced us to go to a secondary target, which was also not visible. It was a long and exhausting trip, over 9 hours. And when we landed, we were told that the mission did not count because we couldn't hit the target. Dear God, I thought this was to be my last, and now we had to go through it all over again, all the sweat of one more raid, being so close to having it all over with. However, when I went down to operations after dinner to check on HR for the next morning, there was a bulletin from group headquarters. They had reversed the ruling, and today's mission, we were given credit for it. I was ecstatic. I was through. I was going home. The relief that swept over me was indescribable. I headed directly to an old barn which had been converted into a chapel, got down on my knees, and simply said, "Thank you, God." Sunday, August 27th. Slept, blissfully ignoring HR. Laid around all day, relishing the thought of no more missions. After dinner, while watching a movie, I was called out by Colonel Darton and asked if I would be willing to serve as a radio operator on a trip to England to ferry some P-38 fighter pilots transferred to the 8th Air Force. He said it was absolutely voluntary, since I had already flown my required 50 rate, and besides, we would not fly over enemy territory, our route being west over the Mediterranean, across the northern coast of Spain and France into England. Besides, I could have a 3-day pass while in London, and my orders to return to the States would be waiting for me when we got back to Italy. Sounds pretty good to me. Tuesday, August 29th. We took off at midnight after I had been briefed by a British communications officer providing me with the codes that I would need to identify our plane as friendly as we approached England. About 3 a.m., somewhere, I guess, over Sardinia, the weather turned very nasty. About 4 a.m., Colonel Barton, our pilot, called me on the intercom and said that he had changed flight plans due to the weather. And instead of not going up the Atlantic coast, we were turning to fly directly north over occupied France. Quote, he said, "We are going to altitude, so go on oxygen and douse all the lights. There are German fighter bases down there," he said. Now, I didn't have to go on this. I had already flown my 50. And here I was on one lone B-17 with no fighter escort, flying smack over hostile territory and no fighter escort. It was the longest flight of my life. Coldest too. There was no heat on the B-17, and the air outside my thin side of the plane was 55 degrees below zero. All I had on was the leather jacket, the heavily heated flight equipment I didn't think I was going to need because we weren't going to go to altitude and we were going to go in all this friendly territory, but there I was. About 7:30 a.m., I tuned into the assigned UK frequency as we were approaching the English Channel. And I started pounding out the code identifying us as friendly. As friendly. Since by now, British anti-aircraft radar was about to pick us up on our approach and would identify our plane as hostile unless I could get us identified as friendly. For years now, German bombers had been coming this way to destroy, and they did destroy, many British cities. The incredible bombing raids over 3 or 4 solid years of combat. Now their radar obviously couldn't identify us as friendly unless I could identify us as friendly. I tapped away. Nothing. No answer. Nothing but static. Once again, I tapped out, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Again. Nothing, static. I reached into my knapsack for the response code, which would clear us for entry. I wanted to double check exactly, make sure it was what I was sending you the right signal. There it was, right there in writing in my notes from the briefing. Took a deep breath and started da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I pounded out again. Same thing. Nothing but static. By now, we were almost in range of the British coastal batteries, and certainly by now their searchlights, because it was still dark, were probably beginning to search the sky. The colonel was, our pilot, was getting extremely upset, since very shortly he would simply have to ditch in the channel to avoid being blown out of the sky. Once more, I pounded out, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. By now, my hands were so sweaty, the key was so slippery under my finger. Still, no answering code. Nothing. But that insane, crackling static, finally, squeaking through the nightmare of all that interference, came the sweetest sound I have ever heard all my life. Which was the answering code identifying us as friendly and clearing us for entry into England. Wednesday, August 10th to Wednesday, September 6th. The 3-day pass in London turned out to 6 days, since our departure was constantly delayed by bad weather. I spent the time enjoying the town fully, seeing the sights, Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey, attended dances every night, English hostesses, very nice. Took off at 9 a.m. today and landed back at our base in San Severo, Italy at 5 p.m. This time, thankfully, avoiding enemy territory by going south along the French and Spanish coastlines and then east across the Mediterranean and back into Italy. Now, part of the relief and the joy of completing the 50 was that after you had flown 50 missions, if you survived, you were granted a 2-day leave of absence at your home base. So when we landed, when I got back to Italy, my papers were ready for me to go back home and to begin my 2-week rest leave of absence. Now, I did not wire my folks that I was finished, that I had completed my missions and I was coming home, because travel schedules were very, very chancy. The war was still going on. I would have to fly part way, take a steamer part of the rest of the way. So I had no idea about when I was going to get home and back to Cincinnati. So I didn't wire them, didn't write them, didn't tell them anything about the fact that I was finished and I was coming home. I really looked forward to really surprising. Now, they had not seen me for over a year, since before I reported to duty, and they saw me off at the airport to go overseas. They had not, I had written, but they obviously had not seen me, didn't know anything about it, that I was finished, I was coming home, so I wanted to surprise them. So by the time I got to Cincinnati, it was about 5:30 in the morning, still pitch dark. Got in a cab at the station and go out to Hyde Park, to our home on Stettinius Avenue in Hyde Park. As I said, it was, I guess it was about 5:30, 5:45 in the morning. Everything was dark. I got out of the cab and walked up our walk to the porch, quietly pressed the doorbell, and waited. All of a sudden, the light goes on upstairs. All of a sudden, the door opened, and there was my dad standing there, and I was absolutely mesmerized. But instead of doing all the things I expected him to do, he grabbed me and turned me around and started whopping the heck out of my tail end, saying, "How many times have I told you not to stay out this late?" Jokester. He was always a jokester. Right away, of course, my mom and our kid brother, who was only 8 years old at the time, came pouring out of the doorway. I was smothered in hugs and kisses. Gradually went on into the house, and we had a magnificent breakfast, at which time I shared some of the other prayers that I had said so frequently in these missions. And I was home. And I'll tell you what, the experiences, which I've tried to capture fairly well in the bed, there's a lot more than this, but I have just so much time. Be happy to answer any questions that you might possibly have about anything. Yeah.
How old were you, Lee, when you went
Just
over
19.
19?
Just had my 20th birthday. It's really nice.
Was that an average age?
Pardon?
Was that an average age?
My navigator was 18. Co-pilot was 19. And at 20, I was the old man. So you had an awful lot of young. Now, one thing I wanted to tell you about, one of the worst moments of my life, my fears while flying, was my best friend was a tail of the ball turret gunner. The ball turrets you saw in here, you had to climb into a hatch and climb in, and then you locked in down there. And I thought, my worst fear was getting Mo Bosher was his name, God bless him. How was I going to get him out of that thing if we had taken a direct hit and he was locked down in there, if we were going down? How would I have time before I bailed out? Would I take the time? And I certainly thought in my heart, I will take the time somehow. But thank God that never did happen. And Mo never did get locked down in and got out of it. A lot of things happened, and a lot of, one of the great things of the whole experience was the fact that I really did feel so close to God and felt certain that I was going to be okay no matter what happened, as I told you. So that's it in a capsule as to what had happened, and I'd be glad to anybody ask any questions. Yeah.
What was the worst rate you had in terms of number of planes that left and how many came back?
I'm glad you asked me. One of the capsules I skipped in the interest of time was I had flown, I've forgotten how many, 35, 40, maybe 40 missions. And the flight surgeon came around and to check us out physically to see how we were doing. And he said to me, "I want you to fly tomorrow." He said, "You volunteered too often. I was volunteered to fly with other crews in order to get my 50 in." He said, "I want you to stand down for tomorrow's raid." And I said, "Well, okay, whatever you say." On that day, we sent about 25 airplanes. Our squadron was 25 airplanes in our group. And over the target, those who got back, now, I have to describe the actual patterns of these raids. There were sometimes as many as 200 B-17s in one magnificent flight. And the lower box is the 25 planes of the squadron, always was in the low tail end box. Vulnerable, much more vulnerable than the guys who are flying up in the other higher boxes. What happened on this particular raid, over 200 Messerschmitt 1090s, the fastest and their most lethal fighter plane, hit that lower box, and all 25 of our planes went down, including the navigator and my bombardier, who was not required to stand down that day. So you saw the scene about when everybody was waiting, watching for the guys to come home and counting them. And we began to count every one of our squadron did not make it. And I said, did you see any shoots? Like some of the guys who finally got back from the other squadron, did you see any shoots? No, I didn't see any. I was hoping to pray to God that somehow or other these two friends of mine had made it. We didn't see the shoots, and I never did know whatever happened to them if they ever got out. But that was the worst. That night, I have to tell you this, a true story. One of the procedures after every mission, we were checked out by the flight surgeon, and there was always a couple of fifth rye whiskey at the briefing table, and each of us were allowed to have a shot or two of the rye whiskey as to settle us down. Those of us who had, the rest of us sitting around this table, we had all signed for our shots because we were looking forward to having a party. That night, we withdrew all the bottles of rye whiskey that we had coming to us, and for the rest of the group, we had a wake. We killed most of that whiskey. I'm not proud of this, but we did. All we had to cut it with warm grapefruit juice, and it wasn't a celebration. It was a wake. I'm glad you missed that because I forgot to talk about that. Anything else? Yeah, Joe? Okay, I'm really delighted to be able to see you and talk to you because I don't think a lot of the, World War II for a lot of you is ancient history. And I think there's a lot of kids your age that don't know too much about what happened. But this kind of thing, I think, you'll remember. So thank you very much for listening.